This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that one friend who always finds the best travel deals, picks the right cards, and somehow ends up in first class for the price of coach? How do they do that? Well, Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things travel finance, like which travel cards earn their keep and which are just heavy, shiny metal, and planning group trips that won't ruin your budget or your friendships. So travel smarter and spend less. That's the key with help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Armchair-Explorer is a part of the Voyescape podcast network. Check out all of their shows from around the world at voyescape.com.
There is a saying that Arabs would say whenever foreigners would come to their land and ask them how do they know so much about the sky. وَكَيْفَ لَا أَعْرِفُ سَقْفَ بَيْتِي? And how do I not know the ceiling of my own home?
Hey guys, welcome to Armchair Explorer. I'm Aaron Miller. I'm a travel writer and your host. And today we've got one of our bucket list episodes. You may have noticed we do lots of different formats, from on-location documentaries and destination guides, lots more. We're trying to be a little bit like a travel magazine in a way. Lots of different types of articles, lots of different types of formats, all that stuff. So our bucket list episodes are basically just that, shorter episodes about one amazing, absolutely must-do, once-in-your-life travel experience. So far, we've had everything from the Everest of great white cage dives to seeing the Northern Lights, looking out over the Ruth Glacier at the base of Denali. So scroll back and check those out if you haven't already. Today, we're going to the desert to watch stars with the Bedouin. El Haramil Desert is located about an hour's drive from the oasis city of Alula in Saudi Arabia. And if you haven't checked out our 3-part documentary series, The Elements of Alula, which we recorded on location, please scroll back and check those out too. Among other things, it features a hot air balloon crash. Actually, I've never laughed so hard in my life. They call it a giggly landing. We were fine, obviously. Hidden treasures of the ancient world, absolutely mind blown by those. Producer Jason's mic being attacked by a camel, yes. And this experience, Bedouin stories in the sky. So a lot of the time when we're on location, we get to do these amazing experiences, but then we've only got enough space in the final episode to use a few clips from that. And in this case, that just wasn't enough. It was the most special stargazing experience I've ever had. And not even really for the stars themselves, if that makes sense, but for the stories that went with them. This episode is about learning to see the stars and the desert through the eyes of the Bedouin, through the people who have lived there for thousands of years and whose very existence and survival was shaped by the night sky, and ultimately the poetry they saw within it and passed generation to generation and still do to this day. Stories of love and tragedy, revenge and jealousy, the whole gamut of human experience written into each far-off sparkling light. So we're just about to get going with that. But before we do, I know this part of the world is filled with preconceptions, so I just want to do a little disclaimer about that and my take on it. So Saudi Arabia, perhaps more than anywhere else in the Middle East, has these preconceptions. But as you listen to this episode, I'm going to ask you to put them to one side. If you're familiar with the show, time and again, I hear from guests that come on how the Middle East, in their own personal experience, is not at all what they expected or what they've been led to believe. It's a region renowned for hospitality, the generosity of its people, a place rich in history, art, and culture. Without fail, everyone tells me how amazing their experience of the Middle East is. Now, Saudi Arabia isn't perfect by any means. I make no judgments. I'm not going to play politics. This is a travel show. But I do believe deep in my heart that travel is and has always been a vehicle for change. And when we travel with an open mind and an open heart, we become part of driving that change. So with that, I'm going to hand over now to Badria. She's a young Saudi woman. It's dark outside. It can get cold in El Haramil at night, so she's wrapped in a thick shawl. Originally from Riyadh, she's been staying in this part of the desert to live with and learn from the modern-day Bedouins. So this is astronomy from an Arabian perspective, not the modern astronomy we're used to. This is ancient astronomy, the astronomy of the desert and the stories of the sky. Blankets and pillows are laid out in the sand, night has fallen, the stars are getting brighter, and Badria begins to speak.
This kind of isolation, this silence, is something that you can't really achieve in the city. No matter how much soundproofing we do or music we put, we can't give you the authentic feeling of being out in the desert if you're not really out in the desert. So right now there's no infrastructure above you, there's no pipes beneath you, there's no electricity, there's no close roads. We're completely out in the desert. So I'll give you a moment to take in the silence, try to absorb it as much as you can, and try to notice the little things. Something that I noticed after being in the desert for a long time was I always thought that the night was dark. If there was no moon, I thought that it would be completely pitch black. But what you'll notice is when you look around, the sky actually glows. So we have 0 lights on right now. We turned everything off. So that's purely the glow of the sky. So here in Al-Gharamil, the landscape is very unique. However, for the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, it's almost completely flat desert. So from Iran to the Middle East to North Africa, it's almost completely flat. As far as the eye can see, it's just sand and sky. And it stays the same. You can travel for days, weeks, months, and the landscape won't change. Even sand dunes move around with the wind. There's no mountains, no rivers, no forest. So the feeling of being in the desert, the feeling of being completely isolated, living your entire life on a blank page, was the experience of the ancient Arabs. And the Arabian Peninsula was one of the harshest places to live. In order for any civilization to survive, you need 2 things. You need to know how to navigate, and you need to know how to tell time. So let's start with the first one, navigation. So of course you need navigation to know where to get your next meal, to know where to travel, where to trade. You need to know how to get from one place to another. However, imagine how difficult it must be to navigate in a desert. If you were living anywhere else in the world, and you wanted to get from point A to point B, it would be easy. I'd tell you, sure, just go straight until you see a forest, then turn right when you see the mountain, then follow the river, and then you're there. However, imagine, again, living on an empty canvas, in an environment so unforgiving that even your footsteps are wiped away by the sand. So that's the first question. How were they able to navigate? The second question was, how were they able to tell time? Of course, you need to know how to tell time on the ground scale, years, months, seasons, but also on the smaller scale, so weeks and days. And of course, in the desert, we don't have big forests that turn pink and then green and then lose their leaves. We don't have animals that clearly shed their skin. We don't have grass that dies and then is alive again. Sand is pretty much the same color year-round. So how did the Arabs know when the winter was, when the summer was, when to harvest, when to plant, how long their seeds needed in order for them to become plants, when to save their water, when to drink it? These were all very delicate measurements that the Arabs needed to know in order for them to survive. So how were they able to figure that out? The aspect they went into the most was, of course, the sky. So that was what defined our culture more than any other aspect of the environment. So they did exactly what you're doing now. They looked up and they deciphered everything that's in the sky. They understood every color of every star, the movements, the brightness. They understood the sun's path, the moon's path. And because it started as survival, every part of society knew it. Everyone knew the sky. And then as everything is, it starts with survival and then it turns slowly into culture, it softens, it becomes music, poetry, romance. but I just want you to keep in mind that everything I'm about to tell you was a matter of life and death for the Arabs. So in order for them to understand the sky, they first saw it as a device. So they understood exactly how the sky moved in regards to the viewer. So the viewer, or you, looking at the sky right now, you're the most important point. You are the 0 point. Today in modern astronomy, it's all calculations and numbers and satellites, but traditional astronomy has to do with the viewer. So it all depends on you. So you have to look at the sun and the moon and the stars and understand them so you can really understand astronomy. You can't understand it from a screen. And you'll understand that even tonight when you're looking up, you'll start to understand that this is where everything came from. So everything that we know, the starting point was because humans decided to look up, and then humans decided to wonder. So tonight, don't just look up, I want you to also wonder, to make your own connections, your own patterns, because that's where everything we know started. So the first thing you need to understand about the sky is that everything moves. The sky moves differently every day. So every day, these stars rise 4 minutes earlier than the day before. So every single day, the sky shifts a little. So because of that, in 6 months, we're going to see a completely different sky. So there is, of course, a sky underneath us, right? Half of the sky is still underneath us, and the other half is above us. So in 6 months, it'll switch. So that's why every night we have different stars to see, and we have different stars based on the seasons. So imagine you're lost in the desert, and you're dying of thirst, and I tell you, I'm going to save your life. I'm going to give you a map, and you're going to be able to navigate. And then that map starts to move. It would be impossible to navigate. So in order for the Arabs to understand the sky, they had to have one reference point. They had to have one star in the sky that never moved. So the North Star is the only star in the sky that doesn't move, and all these stars rotate around it. So whenever you're lost in the desert, you find the North Star, and then you know that that's north. But another really interesting thing you can know about the North Star is where you are on Earth. So we know that the way that we study the Earth is through latitude and longitude lines, right? So we have latitude lines that divide the Earth horizontally, and we have the longitude ones that divide the Earth vertically. So we have 180 lines dividing the Earth horizontally. The line in the middle, the 0 line, 0 degrees, is called the equator. Then we have 0 to 90 degrees all the way up, and 0 to negative 90 degrees all the way down. So again, say you're lost in the desert and you want to know where you are on Earth. So all you have to do is you take one arm and you point at the horizon. So the horizon is the line that divides the sky and the sand. So all this is the horizon. So you take one arm, you point at the horizon, then you take another arm and you point at the North Star. So what angle am I making with my arm? If this is 90, that's 45. What's that? 30, 27 to be exact. But you're very close. So if you look at our coordinates right now on Google Maps, you'll see that here in El Gharamil Desert, we're on degree 27 north. So this also acts as you can understand where you are on Earth. And they became so precise with this knowledge that they could find a well of water in the desert. Imagine the scale of a well of water in just this desert, El Gharamil Desert. If you didn't understand how to navigate precisely, it would be impossible to find. It's like if I took my ring off and I threw it in Europe and I asked you to find it. So they became so precise with this navigational device that they were able to navigate down to 50 centimeters. So this was their error margin. And the way that they did it was they would draw geometry through the sky and they would literally follow the stars. The second mystery was time telling. So of course, every detail in the desert helped them, every pattern. In fact, I've met Bedouins here in Al-Ula, personally, modern day Bedouins, that could look at the sand and they could look at the patterns in the sand, or like the small waves that the wind makes. And with just one look, they could tell me if there was water underneath that sand and if that water was fresh or salty water, just by one look. So imagine how immersed they were in this quiet that you're feeling now, in this darkness, that they were no longer foreign to it. In fact, there is a saying that Arabs would say whenever foreigners would come to their land and ask them how do they know so much about the sky. They would reply with, وَكَيْفَ لَا أَعْرِفُ سَقْفَ بَيْتِي? And how do I not know the ceiling of my own home? So again, this was the ceiling of their home. And this kind of quietness that you're in, this was how they lived their entire lives. So the Arabs were very delicate with their time telling. And the reason why was, of course, they had to be. An example I can give you is the Arabian palm tree. Today we know how to cultivate it and we're experts at it, so you see the palm tree everywhere in Al-Ula. The original Arabian palm tree was so delicate that if you wanted to harvest its wood, you had a 2-hour window in the day to cut it down. Inside of those 2 hours, the wood would be strong enough to build with. But outside of those 2 hours, the wood would become brittle and fragile and your house would fall down. So they had to understand time on the large scale, so years and months, but also days and hours with just the data that they had around them. So they were so precise with their seasons that you know how today we have 4 seasons? The Arabs divided each of those into 10 or 11 seasons each. So every few days was a new season with new crops, new celebrations, new songs. But of course, I'm not going to teach you all the seasons now. I'll teach you the basic ones, the Arabian summer and the Arabian winter. So there are a few characters in the Arabian winter that are very important. Once you see them, you know you're in winter. So Al-Thuraya is the most famous object in the sky. She's like the main character. And the reason why we know this is because when you read the Arabic poetry, you'll see that all the stars are referred to by their names. So Al-Dabaran, that's Al-Kursi, Al-Jadi, which is the North Star, that's Al-Kursi is Cassiopeia. However, when the poetry just says the star, they always mean Al-Thuraya. So she's so famous and she's so appreciated that she doesn't even need to be named. So if you ever come across Arabic poetry, if you see the star, that's who they're talking about. So again, the way that they remembered the sky was through stories. So they would start with survival, but then they would tell stories and legends, romance, revenge, murder. All of these stories existed in the sky. So right here, you can see that there's a very angry looking star, right? It's reddish or orange, and it's flickering very brightly. So for the Arabs, when they looked at that star, it inspired passion in them and tragedy. And that's why that star is called Al-Dabaran. Al-Dabaran in Arabic means to follow closely in someone's footsteps. So Al-Dabaran is always following Al-Thuraya. So he's known as the follower of Al-Thuraya. And of course, we know that the sky has never moved backwards. The sun has never risen in the west. So we know that for thousands of years, Al-Dabaran has been following Al-Thuraya, but Al-Thuraya has never once looked back. And that's the tragedy of their story. So Al-Dabaran is known as the lover that has never been shown love back. And what's interesting is the moon's path, so the moon again rises in the east, the moon's path passes exactly between Al-Dabaran, which is the star, and between Al-Thuraya. And then it continues on, and it sets in the west, and eventually it goes back again. So every night, the moon passes right next to Al-Dabaran, and Al-Dabaran asks if he can marry Al-Thuraya. So he proposes to Al-Thuraya through the moon, and then a few hours later, the moon moves up. It goes to Al-Thuraya, it passes on the proposal, but every night Al-Thuraya refuses. And then the moon has to go back again and again and again. And this story has continued for thousands of years. So there's actually an Arabic saying that describes this relationship. And it goes, أوفى من الدبران وأغدر من الثريا, which means if one side is more loyal than al-Dabran, then the other side will always be more treacherous than al-Thuraya. So another way that the Arabs envision the sky is described by a poet called Dhurrumma. And what he said was essentially he would lie down on his back and he would look up. And when you're lying straight down on your back, you can't see anything what's around you. You can only see what's up. So he would look up and he would have his arms outstretched like this. And he would imagine that he was a bird and that he was flying over the Arabian desert. So in his imagination, the land and the sky switched. And suddenly he feels that he's flying over the sky. So these are camels, there's the lady, there's Al-Thuraya. These are all elements that he's looking down on. And if you can kind of see, so there's a stripe here that's a little bit brighter than the surroundings, and that's actually the Milky Way. But he didn't really know it was the Milky Way galaxy, so he called it the river. So it was the river in the middle of the desert. And so one famous story that came out of the river, so that star is on one side of the river, and Al-Thuraya is on the other side. So again, because Al-Thuraya is the most beautiful object in the sky, there are many stories that are associated with admirers that she has. So that's one of them. But the struggle with the star is that he exists on the other side of the river and he can never get to her. So there's so many tragic stories that have to do with Al-Thuraya. And there's another star, a very, very important star. It's very, very bright as well. So that star is called Suhail in Arabic. So the way that they distinguished between Al-Jadi and Suhail is through a story called the Four Daughters. So the four daughters, they're also known as Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, the Little Bear, but in Arabic they're called the Four Daughters. So this story, very basically, is that these four daughters, they're carrying the coffin of their murdered father, and they're rotating around the North Star, right? So for thousands of years, these four daughters refuse to bury their father, and they rotate around Al-Jadi, or the North Star. And the reason why they're doing that is because they're accusing the North Star of murdering their father. But of course, we know that the North Star never moves, right? We know that it's standing in his place, and he's confident, and he's never moved for all of these years. In this story, that means that he's innocent. So Al-Jadi is kind of who we would call someone that's innocent or wrongly accused, someone that's confident. We would nickname them Al-Jadi after that star. The real murderer of the fathers of those daughters is that star there. Because he only shows in the winter and he makes a small leap over the horizon. So anyone that kind of goes very far away and hides and you only see them rarely, that's probably the behavior of someone that's guilty. So that's why that's known as the guilty star and that's known as the innocent star. So the sky is filled with these stories. So now you know how to navigate and you know how to tell time. You know that when you see her, it's winter, and when you see these birds, those are the summer stars. But these are all ancient stories. So I'm going to conclude this with what I think is a very interesting modern story. So Aramco is the biggest oil and gas company in Saudi Arabia. It's what made Saudi Arabia rich. Everyone knows it. But not many people know the backstory. So the way that Aramco was initiated is there was an American oil and gas company that wanted to dig for oil in Saudi Arabia because they knew that Qatar, Bahrain, and all the other surrounding countries had oil. So Saudi Arabia is so big that there was no way that oil didn't exist there. So they sent their engineers and their equipment, and they started to map out the desert. However, because the desert is so mysterious, it was very difficult for them to find anything. And they searched and searched and searched for 10 years. The American companies almost went bankrupt because of this search. So after 10 years of looking, they ran out of money, they ran out of time. The American petroleum engineers that came to Saudi Arabia decided to consult the Bedouins. So they decided to ask the Bedouins how they understood the desert and how they navigated. So they went around asking the tribes, and of course all these tribes spoke Arabic and they spoke in poetry. So it was very, very hard for them to decipher anything. It's like if you didn't speak English and you tried to talk to Shakespeare. But eventually they found one man. His name was Khamis bin Rabthan, but they called him by his last name, bin Rabthan. And he was very clever in the way that he was able to communicate to these Americans how they used the stars to navigate, how they drew triangles in the sky, how they essentially would follow the stars. So he taught them this method of navigation. But of course, telling American petroleum engineers to follow the stars, they're going to think you're crazy. So before they followed his method and before they mapped out the desert with his ancient astronomical methods, they decided to run a test. So they asked him to prove that this worked. And he figured out a very interesting experiment for them. So he told them, today we're going to leave our base camp and we're going to go deep into the desert. 5-6 hours of traveling. Because they had no other choice, they followed him. And suddenly he stopped them and he asked them to come out of their cars and he told them to take one of their spare tires and to bury it in the desert. And he promised them that the next day, when they went back to their camp, he would draw a straight line from where he was standing all the way to the tire, and he guaranteed them that they would find it. And again, try to imagine how tremendous of a task this is. But he knew he was going to find it because this method was honed over thousands of years of his ancestors finding wells of water. So he was confident in his abilities. And of course, the next day, right before sunrise, when the sky was still dark, he drew a straight line from where he was to where he knew that the tire would be. And so when the sun came out, they traveled with their cars until he asked them to stop, to look under their feet, and of course they found that tire. Of course, because he found it, he became their master navigator. And because he understood the desert, because he understood the patterns of the sand, the names of the wind, the movement of the sky, he was a very key part to Saudi Arabia becoming what it is today. So the reason why we're all here is because he knew that knowledge, and that knowledge stuck with him even when the rest of the world developed, even when they had their big satellites and their GPS systems and their fancy cars. His traditional knowledge is what saved them. And that traditional knowledge still inspires us today. So as you look up, try to remember that. Try to remember that what we're looking at right now is exactly what they saw thousands and thousands of years ago. Any other experience in the world, especially if it's a historical experience, they're going to recreate it with projectors or speakers, lights, computer fabricated visuals, displays. But this, what you're seeing here, is the exact same sight that they saw. This silence is the exact same silence that they heard. This cold, the air on your face, this is the pure, unfiltered feeling of being in the desert. So I just want you to keep that with you.
Armchair Explorer is produced by Armchair Productions, the audio experts for the travel industry. Jason Patton did the field recording for this episode and production. I'm Aaron Miller. I wrote and presented the show, and Charles Tyree does all the extra production on Armchair Explorer. I'll see you next time.
Quick question. Do you want travel tips from people who have actually been there?
Our show is co-hosted by Tim Johnson, an award-winning travel journalist who's been to more than 145 countries around the world. And I'm David Brody, the other co-host who's been travel podcasting for 20 years while traveling to 50-plus countries around the world.
In about 10 or 20 minutes per show, we break down a destination with the kind of insight you usually only get from long guidebooks or hours of research.
So if you want expert advice, zero fluff, and travel inspiration that you can actually use, search for Travel in 10 wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can also find us at voyescape.com.
Hi, I'm Pauline Fromer, host of the Fromer's Travel Podcast. We post new episodes weekly, detailing the kinds of money-saving tips and cultural insights that will make your trips richer without making you significantly poorer. We do so by interviewing real travel experts like TV host Samantha Brown, Fromer's authors from around the globe, and such public figures as Free Solo's Alex Honnold. It's a fun travel party. I hope you can join us.